request there to say it's okay that I'm recording? Wonderful. All right, well, thank you everybody who's here. We're going to get into introductions in just a second. This is our first of 2 webinars. Both of them are identical, so you don't have to attend the other one that is tomorrow on March 8th. This is our agenda for the next 40 minutes. It is my goal to keep this within 40 minutes. However, we have the full hour. So at any time that you have questions, please ask. And I'll have some time at the end for questions as well. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Michael Hakkarainen. I'm the PCBL specialist with the Digital Teaching and Learning team. And I will be kind of your guide on the side as you go through this implementation grant application phase, as well as your host for the PCBL review committee meetings and things like that. We're going to do introductions here for you guys in just a second, but here's what you can expect over our session. I'm going to run through the PCBL implementation objectives. And what I mean by that is we're going to actually look at Utah code for just a minute. And then we're also going to look at the PCBL framework, which I believe you're all familiar with. But I want to talk about those 2 things just so you have a little bit of background as we dive into the grant application. I'm also going to review our plan for funding, both for implementation over the next 2 years that you'll receive if your grant is approved, as well as the 3rd phase, the 2 years of expansion. And that way it'll help you to sort of set up your budget, both for this application and then again 2 years from now. We'll walk through the application, and I've made a copy for each school district. So you can open your own or you can follow along on the screen with me. And at that time, if there's anybody that needs to be added or anything like that, we can take care of that as well. After we've looked at the application, I'll give you a review of the scoring policy here. And I just want to reiterate something, and I'll say this a lot, but the PCBL grant program is a competitive grant program. It was competitive to get into the planning phase. It's not going to be as competitive to remain in the implementation part. So what you're going to be doing in this application and what we're going to be scoring is your progress so far and your plans for the future, but not comparing you to other districts like or LEAs like may have happened when you applied for the planning grant. Then I'm going to talk about very quickly the deadline, which is April 29th, which is the last Friday in April, and how that will work when you submit it. And then the timeline for how we will review those grants and approve the funding and when you can expect to start seeing the money. And then we'll go over questions and I'll answer everything once we're done with that. Okay, so real quick intros. I'd like to go around the room. I'll call on you. Please tell us who you are and which district you're from and what your role is. And to my right is Nan. Did I pronounce that correct?
You did.
Great.
And I am the superintendent of North San Beach School District, and I am wear many hats, one of which is PCBL in this initiative. And I work with a team to just try to push this forward. So there you go.
Fantastic. And you can check the box that says your superintendent attended this meeting. So
I will do that. Thank you.
Okay, and next, Amy Anderson.
Good morning. I am Amy Anderson. I am the instructional coach at Rocky Peak Virtual Elementary, which is a part of the Jordan Virtual Academy, the new school system at through Jordan School District. So the Virtual Academy.
Yay, thanks for being here. And yeah, definitely kudos to the Jordan District who has everybody here. Casey.
Hi. So I am also at Rocky Peak Virtual Elementary, but I'm the digital instructional coach. So me and Amy work together to help our teachers.
Fantastic. I'm just gonna take a wild guess here. Elizabeth Lewis, also from Jordan School District.
Yep, and I work at Kings Peak High School, which is part of the Virtual Learning Academy. And I am, we call myself a virtual learning specialist because I also work with Utah Students Connect and the online, or our online credit recovery program with the 6 districts that we work with.
Fantastic. I'm glad to have all of you here and part of the PCBL grant program as well. And Cami, also from Jordan, right?
Yep. Hello. Sorry, I'm in a low Wi-Fi area, so no video right now. Hi, Cami Taylor. I work in Jordan. I'm the computer science administrator.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then I have 2 teammates here from our digital teaching and learning team. I'll let Todd go first.
Thanks, Michael. I've met several of you. Good to see you. My name is Todd Call. I help coordinate a few different initiatives at USB, including the Digital Teaching and Learning Grant Program, and then the Personalized Competency-Based Learning Grant Program alongside Michael, who is the primary lead in this space, and really believe in all things around Utah's Portrait of a Graduate and things that come out in our PCBL framework, and excited for this work and all that you're doing to kind of be a leader in this space and set an example for others who are also going down this road and navigating more learner-centered approaches. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for the call back. No pun intended, Todd, call back to that Portrait of a Graduate. That was a good point to make. I don't think I have that in my slides anywhere, but that's sort of like the keystone of why we're doing all this, right? The North Star. Thank you. And Melanie Durfee, also from the DTL team.
I'm really excited to be part of this initiative. This is really exciting to see how we can support LEAs in the way that makes the very most sense for them. So I'm really looking forward to this.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So let's start unpacking our PCBL implementation grant objectives. I have a link here on this slide deck, actually, and I'm going to bring it up right here to Utah Code Part 53F-5-5. So I'm going to put this in the chat so that you all have it. You can open it on your own, or I'll be sure to include it in the email that I'll send here in a minute. Where's my chat? Okay. There you go. If you want to look in this code, you'll find that it's broken down into 7 parts. And in the definitions, we're just going to talk about PCBL and what all of that means. And there might be some mention of things like competency-based learning, which is what this grant was originally titled. Then we're going to run through part 2, which talks about the review committee and the technical assistance you're getting right now. But your section is 504, implementation grants. And I'll talk a little bit about how these requirements and expectations are written right into your application. So in part 502, letter C, it does say technical assistance training will include the following: instructions on completing your grant application and the grant application requirements, information on the scoring metrics used to review the grant, and information on personalized competency-based learning. We're going to achieve all 3 of these here in just this one webinar. When we look at section 504, which is specifically written about the implementation grants, I want to point out a couple things. It says that the state board, subject to legislative appropriations, will award the implementation grant to the following: an LEA or charter school that submits an implementation grant application that meets the requirements established by state boards. So we're setting the expectations for you. Again, you will not be competing against other districts. So let's take, for example, if Jordan School District was already implementing all 5 components of the PCBL framework, and maybe another district was just getting started on 1 or 2 of them, you wouldn't be compared to each other. It's all about the expectations set forth in the grant. The LEA designee has attended the technical assistance training. You're doing that right now. And then finally, LEA implementation grant application has been recommended by the review committee, and that's what will come up afterwards. We will review as a committee all of the applications and approve them. That will happen in May. When we look at number 2, this is where all the requirements for the implementation grant application live, right? And I want to point out that number 2, and then the 2-letter I's, it says a program will have a school-wide implementation, or if the LEA intends to implement initially with a population smaller than the school-wide or district-wide, the program includes steps to phase the program in school-wide or district-wide over a specified period of time. And that's also brought up in the planning grant, and you'll hear it again in the expansion grant. We do not expect that in this implementation phase, every single school in your district or charter will be moving into PCBL, but we want to hear about the plans you have to make that happen. Then down here in Roman numeral 4, it says the program will focus on district alignment with the core principles described in section 53F502. And that is the PCBL framework. You all probably have seen this already. If not, I'm putting a link in the chat for you here as well. In the PCBL framework, there has been some revisions made recently, cutting back on 6 components to 5, because we've taken the component of equity and made it part of the entire framework. We'll dive into that a little bit more in just a minute. But I want to just point out that core principles described, that's referring to our USBE framework. I'm going to pause for a second because I've been talking a lot and very fast. Are there any questions about any of those key points? Competition, framework, funding? Okay, a couple other things called out in the code. The program will address a need determined by the data and the LEA or community, and that's going to be unique to your LEA. You'll have a strong evaluation plan that will clearly measure the success of your program. You're going to need to have a list of signatures of key stakeholders, and we'll talk about that in the grant in just a moment. One of those signatures will be the superintendent. Now, superintendents are very busy, period. But to this time of year and in the current climate of our world, probably even more superintendent, it's more busy. So if they can't attend this, you can always share this recording or review it with them, but you will need to get their signature. You have a capacity, qualifications, local governing body, and time to successfully implement this program. You have an intentional and feasible scope of work to implement the program, and then it aligns with LEA's budget, with the planning process, and then finally communicate and promote the plan with parents, teachers, and members of the community. We're going to call them stakeholders moving forward. Now, in the PCBL framework, there are these 5 essential components. They include culture of learning, which is synonymous with portrait of a graduate. And some districts may have their own personalized portrait of a graduate, or you may be adopting the Utah portrait of a graduate. If you have done neither, we do have portrait of a graduate sessions coming up with some training from KnowledgeWorks, and I can email you more information about that if you're interested. But that's what you're going to tie back to in your application here when we refer to culture of learning. Learner agency, student voice, choice, and ownership of their learning. Demonstrated competency and assessment calls back to the original competency-based education grant, where we're looking at having students be part of defining success and meeting their learning targets, and not just measuring student success by seat time or traditional grades. Customized supports is referring to what's being put in place for students and how they can access the support they need when they are not learning on target or meeting their expectations. And then social emotional learning. That caution here, that might get a little bit of a revision as far as the title goes, but we're talking about student wellness. The big question you're probably wondering is, how are we supposed to address all 5 components in our implementation grant? I mean, come on, we've only been working on this for a year with our planning grant, right? Well, the answer to that is you don't. No one's expecting anybody to have already mastered these 5 components. We're all working towards them together, and it's a journey, not a race, so there's no finish line. So what we want you to do instead is identify what you've already done. What are your strengths at your LEA or school? Maybe you have a really strong culture of learning, or you've already started doing some professional learning with your educators on learner agency, or you've had a DCA system in place. Start there. What have you already done? Then identify, what are you going to work on next over the next 2 years of this implementation? And don't be afraid to call out like maybe what will be later in your priority list and something that will follow an expansion. But give us be very realistic about what have you done so far and where are you going next? Speaking of where we're going next, let's talk about the funding for just a second as far as what type of funding you can expect. Our planning grant currently had 7 districts in it over the last year, and they were receiving $100,000 each, and that needed to be spent in the 1 year. Our program is currently receiving $1,996,500 per year, and we have to divide that up not only among cohort C, which is you guys, but also cohorts A and B and the incoming cohort D. So what we figured out is a sustainability plan with that amount of funding, which would guarantee the following. 1.4 million for your 7 LEAs if every one of them is accepted into the implementation grant, which means 200,000 per LEA spent over 2 years. Now you don't have to spend $100,000 per year. You can defer some of that money from the first year into the second, but 200,000 needs to be spent over 2 years. And so your budget should reflect that. Following those 2 years, our plan for the expansion grant would have a little bit less money, which makes sense because now we're moving into a sustainability phase. $962,500 for 7 LEAs. breaks down to $137,500 to be spent over 2 years. And so that's up to $75,000 the first year, or you can defer that and use most of it in the second year, where you'll get an additional $62,500. So just keep that in mind as long-term planning. Now, here's another thing to keep in mind. That's what we have in funding now. If the amount of funding were to go up, or let's say an LEA left the program and we were dividing that pot by 6 or 5 instead of 7, well, then the funding would increase. So what I just reviewed is our minimum for the next 4 years. Hopefully it will be more. Are there any questions about that? Okay. So let's dive into the application and we'll walk through it. Shouldn't take us too long. I have created a copy for each district LEA in the cohort. Does everybody have their own copy? Casey Chambers, is that Ross Menlove behind you? Say hi. Oh, he's also behind. Oh, wait, Amy and Casey are in the same.
We're right next to each other.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So go ahead and open up your copy if you like. If you don't, just send me an email. I'll put it in the chat here. And I can always add you to it if I need to. We'll call this intermission. Okay. Within your grant application, there are 10 basic requirements, and these are aligned directly with what you just saw in Utah code. At the beginning, you're going to see 2 simple tables to complete. Might take 5 minutes. Then there's your LEA narrative, and this is probably the meat of the cheeseburger, right? This is the really important stuff. This is where you're going to share your narrative. There are 4 questions about your learning community and your progress so far towards PCBL. There is a feasibility table for you to complete that explains what you're going to do over the next 2 years and has some like actual call to action for specific people. And then there's a progress measurement planning table where you're going to map out how you plan to measure whether or not your PCBL grant funding has been used effectively. We have a PCBL plan of action and timeline, a list of schools that you're participating in the program. 2 and 3 are going to take a little bit of time, but these next parts, the list of schools, the demographics, the identifying barriers, and identifying partnerships should be really quick and easy. Then comes the budget. So maybe this is like a double cheeseburger, because here's another important part. Give us a table of how you plan to spend that money over the next 2 years and a little narrative, just kind of giving some background to it. We then want you to identify those key stakeholders and how you communicate with them. So that's your administrators, your educators, your students, your parents, everybody involved. And then the last thing is a little place to sign. Okay, so I'm going to open up on my screen the actual application. Let's make it a little bit easier to see. There we go. Links at the beginning take you directly to the webinars. If you have any questions at any time, you can contact myself or Todd Call, and all of our information is down here as well. Yep, this is implementation. I have to make a change here real quick. We are not doing a USET bootcamp session. We are only doing these webinars. The bootcamp, if you see it at USET, is for the planning grant LEAs. Okay, after the first page is a breakdown of the requirements and deadlines. We just ask that you complete the webinars in March, and that by mid-March, you've attended this webinar, you'll be good to go. In April, we'll have another webinar if you need it. It is just a Q&A, and it will be on April 5th, and that is before the deadline, which is April 29th. So you have 2 months here to work on this. Then we have some fast facts about completing. I can just review these for you real quick. Basically says that only an LEA who has already been in the planning grant can apply to the implementation phase. We have our implementation grant awards broken down right here. Requirements with the deadline. It says email the electronic copy to Michael. Actually, since this is a document that I created in Google, I've made life a little bit easier for you. You'll simply lose editing rights on the 29th, and I'll just check in with you and make sure that everything is complete. There'll be plenty of reminders throughout April, so this will not sneak up on you. And there's that deadline. One more time, if you have questions, you can contact myself or Todd. Page 3 is then just going to go through an overview of what happens with Cohort C, your PCBL implementation grant. We have links to things like Noster's model, Portrait of a Graduate, P20 competencies, and Utah's PCBL framework, and then a couple of notes. So nothing to complete until you get to page, I believe this is 4. This is where you'll see your LEA overview. You can also complete a simple online form right here. It'll take you to a Google Doc. And so if you can be so kind as to fill that out as well, that will just give me your contact information so that I can get back to you if there's ever any problems. After you've filled out your overview, the second table is the DTL Leadership, where you'll want to get your name and emails for your superintendent, your LEA curriculum director or PCBL manager, your technology director, and then there's room for a few more representatives. So you want to have at least a team of, I believe it's 7. Okay. If you need to add more representatives that are involved in the grant, you can simply click on the table and insert a row underneath and keep adding. Any questions so far? No. Cool. Now we get into the meat and potatoes, right? The LEA narrative. We want you to reflect on your planning year. Just what happened last year. If you've been attending the TNTP meetings with Jim Larson, you've already done this. He had everybody sort of like write a little narrative about what's happened so far. You can literally cut and paste it right in here. 500 words is not that much. If there's a theme I want you to take away from this, it's brevity. I'd like you to spend more time making your point and less time writing a lot of words for us to read. So if you can make your point in this text box, 500 words, that is great. Part 2, anchored in one or more of your current strategic plan priorities. So what's happening at your district? How does PCBL connect? Can you connect the dots for us in here and then tell us what you expect to be true by the end of the implementation grant, which would be June 30th, 2024. Again, 500 words or less, and these boxes will expand if you need more room. Then identify the needs of the LEA in the community and how PCBL will help address some of those needs. And then a brief summary or abstract highlighting your initiative with PCBL so far and what you're going to implement in the next 2 years. Then we get into the feasibility table. We want to know the who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then the stakeholders and the evidence of what's going to be happening with PCBL. And then you'll reference this in question 6. How do you intend to measure progress? And we have some indicators broken down right here. You let us know what tools or measures you will use and how frequently, and your disaggregated baseline data. So that's where you're going to probably spend the most amount of time in the application. We then narrow in on the PCBL framework. And this is where we want to know, what have you done so far? What's going to happen next? And what's going to happen later? So in here, what is your plan for action for achieving each of the core principles? Let us know about how students are empowered, learner agency, how you're using assessment, demonstrated competency and assessment, timely and differentiated supported feedback, also DCA, evidence of mastery. Students learn actively using different pathways and varied pacing, strategies to ensure equity, and how you're going to have rigorous and common expectations for learning for all students. Question 8 is pretty simple. What will your implementation will be throughout the LEA in all grade levels? So I'll call back here to what we said earlier, where you're not expected to implement this across your entire district, but if you're working with your virtual schools or your secondary schools, what will your plans be to build capacity as you move forward? And give us a little timeline of the 2-year implementation award window. This can be just a bulleted list if that's easiest for you. Then we're going to ask a couple more tables here of information. We want to know the schools, their enrollment, size, faculty, the grades served, and like which grades or subject areas might you be implementing PCBL? We have had some districts say, they're starting with math or they're starting with the STEM courses, things like that. So just clarify that, and then how many students will be impacted by your PCBL implementation over the next 2 years. And then this is something you can probably get right from your district's website, but give us your demographics, percent of students, free and reduced lunch, non-Caucasian, students with disabilities, et cetera. This will just help us to analyze like how PCBL is working in different parts of the state. Then this could be a yes or no question, really simple. Have you identified any state statute, board rule, reporting requirements, or other barriers that would hinder your LEA plan? If there's any barrier in your way, we need to know what it is. So drop it right in here to question 11, or simply say no. You might want to meet with some of your district's policy directors and just see if there's anything that's in your way. We've asked this question several times over just the last 6 months, and we've not heard any specific statute, board rule, or anything like that that has hindered LEAs from implementing their PCBL program. Then we ask you to list the technical assistant partnerships that you may have already set up, and I'll get to these in just a minute because we have a list for you at the end of the application. But any groups that you're working with, if you've already been collaborating or bringing in anybody to do professional learning, just cite that right here. And also any existing potential partnerships. So your plans for any future partnerships and the ones you're working with now. After that, we have a summary of the grant awards and how they will be available to you through Utah Grants, and then your budget. So we want to know if there are any spending for each of these categories: salaries, benefits, professional and technical services, property, services, travel, supplies, materials, and all of that. You can always adjust this if you have to later, unless your adjustment is greater than 20% of your budget, in which case you can still make the adjustment. We just have to vote on it as a review committee. And this has already happened this year. There were plans to spend a lot of one of the grants on employees, but they were unable to hire anybody at this particular charter school. And with the pandemic, they decided to shift their spending to materials. We had a quick vote on it. It went through and it was fine. So just be aware, you're going to want to put this in your best calculation, your plan. But again, if it has to change, it can, and that's the process for it. Then a little narrative as to justifying your budget, explaining each category and sort of breaking it down. Just tell us the story. We then ask for a list of key stakeholders and partners, including their names, titles, roles, and signatures. This could include parents, PTA president, things like that. And then there is the LEA's assurances and statement of commitment, where you're going to read through all of these conditions. You have at least 2 representatives participating in the technical assistance webinar, or if you're in a situation where you have to watch this and then share the recording, you can do that. You have been in the Cohort C planning grant and are now joining implementation. You have your full grant team consisting of 4 or more members with support and participating in the planning and execution of the statewide PCBL conference or convening event for Utah stakeholders. You have a list of key stakeholder names and a realistic timeline. Sign it, put in your LEA, the date, and have all that done by April 29th, and then we will vote on it in May. We do have partnerships with the Mastery Transcript Consortium. This is a transcript designed based on competency. So you will have the ability to work with them through USBE. And we also have all of our resources listed underneath as far as everything from the PCBL framework to our strategic plan, and then links to all of the policies and Utah laws that might be connected to PCBL in any way. After that is a list of leading organizations. We've worked with the Aurora Institute, Competency Works, LearnerCentered.org, MTC, the New Teacher Project, but we've listed out more resources from each underneath. So you're welcome to use any of these that might help you with your grant. So it's 25 pages total, but not all 25 pages require your input or submissions. Hopefully it doesn't take too long to fill out. Remember, I said brevity is the key. And anytime you're moving through here and you come up with something and you're like, wait, there's a conference? What's going on with this conference? So you can highlight that and feel free to use your comments. And just go ahead and put in like at my name, and you can send me any questions that you need to or anything like that, either directly here or by email. All right, any questions about the grant? I went through it kind of fast.
Yeah,
Ben?
Michael, I have a question, and maybe I missed something. So when you were on question number 11 in the grant, it doesn't
Yes.
align with the copy I have. Is there an updated copy?
Have you identified any state statute? You don't have that in your application?
No, mine is 13 where it says that. So
Okay.
I don't know if you sent out a more updated one and I just don't have that, which is fine. It's the same question, but it's not aligned. After you get to 11, it's not aligned as far as numbering. So,
Okay, I'm gonna write myself a note and go in fix yours. Did anybody else find the same issue there?
no, probably just me.
Okay. Are you using the one that
Well,
I
and I
wrote?
printed, yeah, and I printed this enough earlier.
Oh,
So if there's other, if you've made some changes or whatever, I probably just don't have the updated version. So I'm just making sure that's the case.
yeah, let me double check and I'll email you if I see.
That'd be
an issue
great.
there.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. I just thought maybe I need access to the more current version. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I find it in the one that's shared with you, I'll just fix it for you.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Amy, Casey, Elizabeth, or Cami, any questions from Jordan? No?
Makes sense.
Okay. Grant scoring. Yay. So the last time we did grant scoring last year, it was on a metric of like 1 to 5. And I read through it and felt it was a little overwhelming. And if you remember earlier, I said this is a competitive grant to get into the planning, but once you're in implementation, you're not competing against each other. So I kind of whittled this down to a scoring scale of 0 to 2. 0 means you just didn't do it. You left the whole thing blank. Number 1, I would give you if you met the expectations. So, yes, you went in, the application has illustrates an understanding of the PCBL framework and it aligns with the vision of Portrait of a Graduate, but it needs some additional support to show that you're implementing these values in your LEA. So this is actually not going to be me that's scoring this, but the whole committee as will go through this. So you'll be getting like probably 10 to 12 reviews of this. So this should average out. 2 will be exceeds expectations, but we're basically going through here and checking like, yes, they did it, or no, they didn't. Let me grab the scoring for you real quick. Here it is. The things that we're going to score, some of them will be yes or no. Like, did you complete the chart with the superintendent, curriculum director, PCBL grant manager, and 2 other team members? Okay, but it's 4, by the way, not 7 or 8. I was wrong there. It's 4. So that's going to be a yes or no. Did you attend the planning grant? Yes or no? Then we go through the why of your application. That should be implementation. I'll fix that in a second. Do you have your links? Are you engaged? Do you have the schools listed? Do you have the alignment to your LEA's plan and the PCBL framework? And then do you specify any technical support? Then we have the what. All of this is, again, yes or no. Is your LEA's name provided? Yes. But when we get to the overview narrative, this is where we break down that 0, 1, or 2 scoring. So we'll do that for the narrative, as well as your PCBL initiatives, your clear picture of success, your long-term indicators table, and articulating your key action steps. But things like, did you complete the table or have your list of schools? Those are just going to be yes or no. And then the last part we'll grade is the how. Will you identify the state statute that hinders any implication? Yes or no. Your budget table will get a score of 0, 1, or 2. And then your grant application is signed as a yes. So does this look like it's kind of a check the box application? Yes. But we're going to check the box because you're showing us how you have already planned and will begin to implement PCBL over the next 2 years. Okay. That's our scoring, and that will all happen May 26th. We will be finished reviewing your applications. The deadline is the 29th. Then on May 2nd, directions will go out to the review committee, and they'll have about 2 weeks to go through and score your application. We'll then announce on the May 26th, if not sooner, when the voting is finalized, which of the cohort C have been approved, and then we can adjust the funding. We'll deliver that to the Board of Ed in June at their first meeting, and funding will begin July 1st of this summer. Now, with the timeline, I just want to come back to this one more time. I know we have about 4 minutes left. The funds will be distributed over 2 years, fiscal year 2023 and 2024, and it must be expended no later than those 2 calendar years, but they do not need to be distributed evenly over those 2 years. So let us know in your budget plan, like, do you need to ramp up earlier, or do you want to save money for the second year? Remember, your plan can be adjusted once it's voted on, but I just want you to be aware that it doesn't have to be the same amount both years. Any questions about that? All right, any questions just in general? Yes, Amy.
I have a quick question. So if, in that time after we submitted and you look over it and we're maybe missing one part or something, we will be given time. I guess my question, are we given time to come back, look at it and go, oh, we forgot to do this, or we need to add a little bit more detail to this before that final vote happens at the end of April? Does that happen, or is that not an option?
Ideally, that makes total sense. Ideally, that situation won't occur because I can see your applications as you're working on them, and we'll be checking them each week throughout April and checking in to make sure, so that when the deadline does approach, ideally, I've already looked at it and made sure that everything is included. If there was an issue where something wasn't included and it was on me, then I would remedy that situation before it went to vote. That's one of the, that's sort of the purpose that I put it into Google Docs. I hope that works for everybody. If you're a Microsoft district or something, I hope you can still get in and use it that way. But this way it can be a collaborative process to make sure the grant application is completed on time and with the information needed. Okay. And any other questions? Good.
Michael, when you excuse everybody else, I have a quick question about a reimbursement.
Sure.
And so
okay. As soon as I stop recording,
that'll be fine.
I can meet on that.
It's just a really quick question. So that would be great. Thank you.
Elizabeth, Casey, or Cami, any other questions? Thumbs up. Good.
Could I ask a quick question about the portrait of a graduate training? So on the curriculum, they send out the curriculum email every week, and it talks about a portrait of a graduate training on March 17th at the state capitol. Is that the one that is good for this group of people to come to?
That would be great. Yeah, it's
okay.
that would be perfect. And the topics for all of those portrait of a graduate trainings are exactly the same. It's just the location. But I think that's the closest we will be to the Valley at any time. There's a couple other ones that are being held down south. There's one in Juab, and there's also one all the way up in Weber. But yeah, the 17th would be perfect. And just remember to wear green because it is St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, good call. Thanks.
Priorities, right? All right, cool. If you're like me, when this session is over, you're going to realize you had a major question you forgot to ask. If that's the case, please email me at michael.hakkarainen@schools.utah.gov, or you can also just put a comment in your LEA's Google Doc application, which I can respond to. Now, if you have an emergency, it better be an emergency too. I'm actually giving you my personal cell phone number, but you can always text or call me at, oh, that's the wrong number. I should have just left it. 385-212-9058. Let me know if there's anything that you need, if something major happens, if it's really close to the deadline or something like that, reach out to me that way. We will have another webinar on April 5th from 3 to 4:30. There will be no presentation in that. It's just going to be a time for me to answer any questions that you guys have as a group. Or if that time doesn't work for you and you need to meet with me one-on-one and do some screen sharing or clarify things, we can always do that by appointment. Just email me and say, hey, we need to talk for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, and we'll set that up. All right. Well, with that, I will stop sharing and also stop recording.